that story. But it does sound very much like something I would say. Mike just preceded me to the microphone is, I think, easily described as an archivist. But I think it's better described as an archive himself, because of the volume of history and historical records, the details. I'm just blown away every time in conversation and formal presentation I get to listen. I'm like, man, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. And yet the detail and the relevant detail of what he offers is so amazing. So thank you, Mike, always for what you share. A couple of years ago, I'm a girl dad. I have 3 daughters, and they teach me a lot. They teach me every day. They teach me a lot. A couple of years ago, my youngest daughter, who is just turned 9 last week, and so she was 5 years old, or 4 years old at the time. And I was dropping her off at school, and her teachers, who knew I was a professor of African American history at Ohio State, had my other 2 daughters. They stopped me. This was January of 2019. They stopped me and they said, Hassan, we're going to take Layla, that's my youngest daughter, Layla and her classmates, all girls school. We're going to take them to the MLK Day Assembly. So she's in preschool, 4 and 5-year-olds. We're going to take them to the MLK Day Assembly. We've done it before in the past, but it hasn't always gone that well because the kids don't know that much about MLK. And so we thought it would be a good idea this year if we taught them a little bit about MLK. And we thought of you. And we were hoping that you could speak to the girls about MLK before we take them to the assembly. And my immediate answer, my response was, hell no. And they were like, what? I was like, no. I was like, 4-year-olds scare me. They ask too many questions, like serious questions. They want answers, right? It just goes on. I was like, no. And they thought I was joking. I was like, I'm not joking. I'm like, no. And I was like, my 4-year-old really scares me, right? Because he's just full of questions. So to make me feel better about their requests, one of the teachers says, well, Hassan, we actually started a conversation with the girls and we began to talk about MLK. And one of the girls said, yes, I know that Dr. King was killed. And another girl said, and I know that he was killed by dragons. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, well, you got to understand, these are preschoolers and they associate kings with dragons. And so they assumed naturally that Dr. King had been killed by a dragon. And I'm thinking to myself, this is supposed to make me feel more comfortable about speaking to these girls about Dr. King. But I said, okay, fine. I'll do it. I'll speak to the girls about 4 and 5-year-olds about Dr. King. And as I began to think about how do you talk to 4 and 5-year-olds about Dr. King, I settled on, well, let's talk to them about something that they can connect to. Somehow they can relate to Dr. King. What could that be? So I began, when I came in for my few minutes, to talk to them about Dr. King growing up in Jim Crow, Georgia. And the things that he would have liked to do but couldn't do because of segregation. The amusement parks he would have liked to go to but couldn't attend. The parks, the schools, the playgrounds, the pools that he couldn't do. I said, these kids will be able to relate and understand that. And then I said, well, let's transition from that and talk to the girls about 1963. 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, where Dr. King leads the desegregation campaign against the most segregated city in America. America's Johannesburg, Birmingham, Alabama. And this is also where he draws on and calls on, rather, thousands of school-aged children to participate in these campaigns. Some as young as the ones who were sitting in front of me, 4 and 5 years old, many of whom go to jail. And as I'm talking to the girls and describing children marching with Dr. King, talking to them about the arrest, talking to them about facing fire hoses, talking to them about facing dogs, one of the young girls raised her hand and said, well, well, where were the police when I began talking about dogs being sick? Serious questions for 4 and 5-year-olds. Spent a little bit more time, and they asked me, now that we had gotten straight how Dr. King had been killed, were any of the children who marched with Dr. King, were any of them killed? I said, no. I said, many of them were arrested. I said, but thankfully that spring and into that early summer, none of them were killed. And we talked a little bit more about Dr. King in Birmingham, then I wrapped up and I got the hell out of there. That afternoon, I picked up my daughter from school, and usually she has a lot to say on the car ride home. And I said, how was the rest of your day? And she said, fine. But she didn't say anything about the 15 or 20 minutes we had spent together talking about Dr. King. And then, we go through the afternoon, we go through the evening, and now it's bedtime. And by bedtime, this is my youngest daughter, by bedtime, I mean 11:30 at night. And so she's laying in my bed, and she's, refusing to go to sleep. And finally, I'm like, look, you got school in the morning, I got to teach in the morning, you got to go to sleep, right? And so at this point, because she knows her dad, she's like, well, can we talk about Dr. King? She said, you're killing me, kid. He's like, all right, you got 5 minutes, right? I said, what did you learn today about Dr. King? And she begins to walk through what I presented, what we had talked about. She talks about, Dr. King growing up in Jim Crow, Georgia, and she says Atlanta, where her aunt lives, and the things that he couldn't do. And then she gets to 1963, and she's talking about kids, march with Dr. King, and kids go to jail. And but she says, thankfully, none of the children were killed. And when she said that, I realized in that moment that I had misspoken. That in fact, 3 girls had been killed, 2 young boys had been killed, although not that spring, but of course in September, when the 16th Street Street Church in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed by Klansmen and moms killed 2 young African-American boys. And so when I heard her say it, I realized I had misspoken. And I told her, I said, no, Layla, I said, actually, I was wrong, I misspoke. I said, there were 3 girls who were killed as a result of them, or as a result of young people marching and protesting with Dr. King. And without skipping a beat, she said, what were their names? What were their names? 4 girls. And I said, well, there's, Cynthia Wesley. And then I said, wait. I said, I can tell you all of their names. I said, give me my phone, because she had my phone, right? So give me my phone, and I Googled, 4 little girls, and of course, those school year photographs, grainy, black and white, are generated, populate, and I showed them to her, and I said, here are the 4 girls, and we go over the names, and she looks at one, and she says, she looks like Asha. Asha's her older sister, who was 9 years old at the time. And so here you have a 4-year-old girl who's making a human connection to a grainy black and white photograph of a child who was murdered by white supremacists some 60 years earlier. And we talked a little more about Birmingham, and I can see finally, thankfully, her eyes started to get a little heavy. And I said, well, look, you can lay down here, and I promise I won't move you when you fall asleep, right? Because of course, that's what we always say to our kids, right? So she lays down, and I'm picking up some, clothes and trying to tiptoe around and be a little quiet. And, 5 minutes pass or so, and it looks like she's asleep. And I'm about to head out of my room, when I hear her say, she doesn't turn around, she doesn't sit up, she doesn't roll over, but she just says, eyes are still closed. She says, I think he was trying to tell us that America is damaged. Stop me in my tracks. And I said, who? She doesn't turn over. She doesn't look at me. She says, Dr. King. I said, damaged? I had never heard her say the word damage, let alone use it in context. I said, damaged? Did I hear you right? Damaged? She said, damaged. That was it. She didn't say anything else. Her eyes never opened. She was gone. And I'm standing there thinking, I think he was trying to tell us that America is damaged. I said, one, I was like, who is this child? And where did she come from? Two, at that point, I had been teaching African American history and civil rights movement for 2 decades. And I was like, I've been trying for 2 decades to figure out how to concisely say what Dr. King had been trying to tell us. You get 15 minutes and she got it down, right? But then I thought, she is 100% correct. That's exactly what Dr. King was trying to tell us. Right? That America is damaged. That's exactly what he was trying to tell us. And here she is at 4 years old, able to reach that conclusion after a 15-minute conversation in a classroom. After 5 more minutes of conversation, after a day of reflection in which we actually talk about children who were just a little bit older than her, who were killed by racial terrorists 60 years ago in the South. That's hard history. That's history that happened that makes us feel uncomfortable today. But that's history that a 4-year-old needs to know about, and more importantly, can grasp the significance and importance of. She didn't shed any tears. She didn't feel like she was responsible. That somehow if there was something that she could have done today to say, no. She understood that that was in the past. But she was able to make sense of it. And was able to draw the bigger understanding that, this thing we call America, this project that we call America, Dr. King was right, it's damaged. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. When I think about the last 3 years of this symposium and the work that the students have done, they've made clear, they've come to the conclusion, they're able to see that America isn't perfect, that America is in fact damaged. That's the reality of the world in which they are growing up in. And they've been unearthing it, the ways in which we have not been perfect, our imperfections, our damage. But they haven't left the room just with that. Just as Dr. King was able to point out, yes, America is damaged, he didn't just leave us with that observation. Also in 1963, in a letter from Birmingham jail, he gives us a blueprint of how to fix the damage. And that's also what's been going on in the Troutbeck Symposium with the work of the students. They're able to see, often for the first time, the ways in which America is damaged, but through the research, through the study, they're also able to see the ways in which people have been trying to fix the damage. Through poetry, through painting, through social activism, through discovery, through recovery. And that's what we should be encouraging as educators and teachers. Leaning into those difficult subjects, leaning into that hard history, leaning into that which occurred and happened in the past that just makes us feel uncomfortable in the present, because out of that, we're able to have this better understanding, not just of what happened, but also of who we are as a people, as individuals, as a nation. We have burdened our children with the myth of perpetual progress. This idea that things may have been bad in the past, but they always get better because this is Connecticut. No. Things change, progress occurs, but because people have been struggling to create that change.